I just flew into Nashville and in Tennessee, just drove down to Columbia. Now I'm at the Sunbelt Rentals location. Now maybe we're sort of at the present times. Let's just go back in time a little bit and talk about DJs, yourself, and your family, the family business. So maybe about how you first got into that industry and what was DJs.
Okay. So my grandfather was in the military and got out of the military in Oklahoma and bought a small rental company that was out there. And it was pretty much inside of a gas station. And at the time, the largest piece of equipment they would rent would be a mortar mixer and was averaging about $7 a day. And then that's when oil field was blowing and going out west. So, got into renting a bunch of equipment to oil fields and expanded. And then when the oil field all took a tank back in the late 80s, about 86, that's when they expanded to the Tennessee side. And so we moved their operation out here. DJ's Rentals started in Columbia here in Tennessee, and then we expanded to a store in Franklin. And then from then, I pretty much grew up here. Every day after school, I was here. Every weekend, I would come here on Saturdays when I was 6 or 7 years old, and my dad would take a wrench and loosen up all the little bolts on a Honda engine and have 5 or 6 of them sitting there and tell me just to take apart every bolt I could see. And so I kind of just learned how to do mechanicing and pressure washing and things like that all the time. By the time I came 7 or 8 years old, I was loading backhoes on semi-trucks and learning how to rewire trailers. And it essentially was my babysitter when I was a kid, is having our little DJ's family, following around different employees, learning how to mechanic or learning how to, just do different things. And it was an interesting way to grow up, but it taught a whole bunch.
Yeah, and that was that same building that we're in right now, yeah?
We moved in this building when I was probably about 15 years old. So interestingly enough, we were right next door.
Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't move very far, but we just expanded to a larger building. So yeah, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in the building next door. I actually drove through that fence a few times with a couple of tractors.
Awesome. So DJs that was there, you were obviously growing up within the business, and then you eventually worked full time, or what was that?
I did. About the time I was about 15 years old, I was given the choice. Hey, if you want to have a truck, you need to start earning more money and doing it. So I started working every day after school, and then every Saturday at that time we were open all day on Saturday. And then obviously during spring and summer breaks, I was working 6 days a week, 11-hour days, just all summer long. Started off yard guy out there loading and unloading equipment, moved to doing light mechanicing, small engine work, even was a small driver for a short while, driving the pickup truck and trailer, delivering stuff all over the place. Then I left and went to college for a short bit, and then was still working on the weekends at that point. Came back, started working on the counter, and that's when we added another store in Franklin at that time where we were expanding. We had a store in Franklin, we put a store in Spring Hill, and I had the opportunity to become the assistant manager of the store here. So I did that and kind of just worked my way up until I was eventually running all the stores. My father kind of took a step back and let me take over, and it was a different transition. I was quite young. I was probably 22 years old when I started taking over a lot of the operations, and but I had literally done every aspect of the business and have been here my entire life. And I was always very methodical about the way I did things and thought, and very frugal. I was always told I was too cheap. I squeaked when I walked. But so I was always very into getting down to the details about what we spent our money on, how we did things. And as an independent, it was kind of limited on the amount of information that you could have.
Yeah.
So I joined things like in the ARA. I joined all the rental analytics and did their little programs and of how to understand your financials, and was always trying to constantly learn more about the financial side of the business instead of just the operational side, and kind of understand how the little nuances of how things worked inside the business. What affects what. If we could tweak this, how could we get better at this? And whereas the two generations before me was, oh, if we have money left in the bank at the end of the month, we're doing a great job. And I was more, I want to know how that money got there. That way I can exploit it and make it better.
Yeah.
So it was a big difference in changes of how I went from yard to shop to driving to counter, and then kind of ultimately taken over. But no, it was, at that point, it was in my blood. It was, I actually thought I was going to be a meteorologist one day, and then after going to school and thinking about it, it's the rental industry is a unique industry, and it kind of drew me back in, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. That's why I'm kind of glad I was able to expand to what I do now.
Yeah, well, when you look at like a rental business, like you can have that mindset where you're just taking money in and investing the money back in and buying more equipment and employees, but there's so much analytics behind the operations and the financials of a business. Like if you divvied up into the pillars, like the sales, rental, service, parts, and then the financials, like there's so much nuances that you can do to, like, as you said, understand how and why you're making the money, and then tweak something over here to maybe increase your damage recovery or your transport recovery, or maybe we can increase our utilization if we change the way that we rent our equipment or the rates. Like it truly is an analytical business, and if you don't have the data to support it, you can't make those decisions.
Right, and that's why it's hard as an independent to, for one, collect that information, and then have enough of it to be able to see the trend and see how little changes can make a difference. I mean, you get your financials, you see where you're spending money and how it's going, but if you only own 10 sewer augers and you're trying to find out a trend, it's kind of hard to see that. But when you have 1,000 of them, you have a lot of back data that you can track and see what works better and what doesn't. If we made a change at this time of the year to this one, would this skid steer rent better than it does in this area? When you're independent, you don't have a lot of the information. But now data is important even to independents. Just having access to it is kind of difficult.
Yeah, even you take the extreme case where you've just got one account code and you push everything into a revenue account rather than splitting it up into the subcategories.
Yeah.
It's like a very basic thing, but like a lot of companies, like a lot of independents probably don't do that.
No, and that was something that we kind of restructured. And in all honesty, when I started taking over the operation side, we didn't even rent our equipment by asset number. It was, hey, I know we have 7 skid steers. I see 3 of them sitting out there. I know I got 4 on rent. One's coming back tomorrow. It was something you just kept in your head, but it's kind of really hard to track how, like, what piece of equipment is doing really good for you.
Yeah.
When you don't do it that way. So, putting that into play was, I think, a big step. Being able to track our rental revenue per asset, or being able to track the amount of repairs that goes into it, and understanding what cost of ownership was for your equipment makes a huge difference. Even something as small as just having 10 units. If you have a unit that is constantly having issues and you're not able to pinpoint it and figure out the reason why, it can really cost you a lot of money going down the road.
And then the challenge that I think independents can have is if you move from renting just at a model level, so you've got 6 of these small units, or 6 excavators, let's just say, or skid steers, or whatever it is, and you tell someone, no, you need to rent it by serialized number, you have to have a process now in place. And someone that's never followed a process before, it turns into a almost like it's making our lives harder. But obviously in the long run, it makes everything much easier. Is that something that you sort of ran into when you were sort of trying to transition that over?
Most definitely. So I'm not going to lie, we tried probably 10 or 15 different scenarios of doing different things. And I think a lot of times with us, coming up with an idea and trying to put it through, that first thing that initially comes out is, oh, that's never going to work for the way we do things. And overcoming the idea of it will work, and we just have to figure out a way to make it work that fits our, the way that we do our business. That part was important, because having those conversations, we were constantly, coming up with an idea and that, oh, that's never going to work for us. Well, you can't have that kind of mentality. And that was something that at the very beginning was kind of rough when we were trying to get switched over to serialized because, as an independent, it's just go, 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 go. And we're not going to sit there and wait for trying to get a number right or whatever else, because we got people waiting and there's 5 people behind them.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to put those strict rules in place when you control the rules. And we were a Penske dealer for a short bit, and that was always something that agitated me. Is I've got the truck sitting right here, but I can't rent it to them because the paperwork's not right, and you couldn't change it, so you had to fix it. Well, as an independent and you own every part of the process, it's hard for you not to be like, oh, just put it on there, we'll figure it out later, which then kind of destroys the whole process behind it.
Yeah. And then someone forgets, or what goes on a whiteboard or a spreadsheet or somewhere.
Yeah, it's those little processes that really make a difference, and you have to have those when you expand. When you're going from 5 skid steers to 25, it's a lot harder, especially across 2 or 3 stores, to keep in your head where all that stuff's at. And you lose 1 skid steer that's worth $30,000. That's a huge chunk of your profits. And so getting that down pat when we were slightly smaller and we were expanding so quickly was kind of paramount to how we did things. Now, we obviously weren't as structured as Sunbelt is, but I felt we went a long ways in a short period of time.
And then, so fast forwarding, so then how did the business obviously grew? You took over more of the locations. It sounded like you were sort of keeping that family business, but you were eventually acquired. So talk me through that next stage.
So we were actually in the middle of a process of doing our succession plan, of which I was going to be, taking over. I took over all of operations, the financial side, but actually taking over full ownership. We were kind of putting together a success plan to get that done, and we were approached by Sunbelt to say, hey, we're wanting to move into the area. Are you willing to sell? And, my initial thing at the time was, no, we're not, because I was just, coming into my prime, wanting to get involved into the actual full ownership of it. And they decided, well, just have lunch with us and we'll see where it goes. So me and my parents all got together. We had lunch with them. Over a course of a couple of weeks of conversations, deal was struck, and they said, all right, we close in 60 days. And it was like that quick, how everything changed. And at the time it was a bit daunting, with just the overwhelmingness of everything that was going on. And but ultimately it was probably one of the best decisions we ever made. It was a great thing for us.
And so why do you think you changed your mind?
Well, money obviously plays a role in part of that. And 2, the rental industry has changed in the last 10 years with, different risk, everything else involved with, the safety rules and regulations around MUP and AWP. We were not a very safety culture company at that point, and coming into Sunbelt now and seeing that really just showed us how far off the ball we really were when it comes to that. But all the added risk and the change in how everything was going, and seeing the opportunity that may lay ahead with Sunbelt, after having a lot of discussions, really kind of pushed us that direction. Like I said, our initial reaction was, no, we're not even interested. But after sitting down and thinking about what could evolve from it, it really changed our mind.
And then, so talk me through the build-up process. You said they close in 60 days. So if there's probably a lot of independents that are listening to this podcast, so they'd be interested to understand what actually goes on during an acquisition through Sunbelt. So what was the process that, like, did they come in and just change the banner? Like, what was that full process?
So we once we had everything set and the date set for the switch over, they came in slightly beforehand and kind of set our stuff up. We had a good conversation with all of our employees. One great thing is that whenever they came in, they said, "Hey, we have the equipment, we have everything we need from that. We're here to buy your name, your employees, in that type of scenario." So it was really great to have the fact that they were really interested in keeping everybody that we had. So they sat down, had interviews with all of our people, and told them, hey, your everybody here is actually going to be gaining more because they can offer a lot more to my employees than what we could do as an independent. So that was a good part of it. Now, obviously, during the process, it was a bit chaotic. Getting the computer switched over, getting more fleet because they obviously brought in a tremendous much more fleet. Having access to more fleet was something that we never had before. As an independent, we had a certain set amount of gear. If somebody came up and says, "Hey, I need to rent 20 scissor lifts," I own 10 of them. I just couldn't do it. And having that switch from one day to the next when they're like, "Oh, hey, you've got access to pretty much unlimited equipment." Somebody comes in wanting 100 scissor lifts. You make a few phone calls, we'll make it happen. And that was huge. That's a big difference from what I could offer before. Now, the safety culture and different things of how Sunbelt operated to what we operated as an independent was a huge adjustment. I think it was a great adjustment, and because I didn't really know or understand how much of a risk we put ourselves through around safety and how we did things. And looking back, I've had this conversation many times when having a kind of a safety meeting, and just how lucky we were as an independent through different scenarios that had happened, that something didn't arise from it. So now the safety culture was a big shock. We for all intents and purposes, when we were an independent, we didn't use safety harnesses. We didn't have high visibility suits. We ran our trucks dang near 24/7. Those rules and regulations that we either didn't understand or didn't follow are there for a reason, and it really was eye-opening to see how big of a difference it makes. Now the processes, like we spoke about before, as an independent, we're always, "Oh, that can't work for us. We're just too busy." So that was a big step, saying, "Hey, whenever you have a piece of equipment come back in, we got to check it out the proper way." Whereas as an independent, I can't tell you how many times I'd have people lined up outside waiting for a piece of equipment to come back, and I didn't even unload it off a trailer. It was just unhook it, all right, back up to it, roll it back out. I literally was calling people at 4:30 in the afternoon saying, "Hey, I know it's due back tomorrow, but if you're done with it, I'll give you an extra $50 back because I got somebody waiting on it." And just that, not really checking the equipment out and not really going through all the processes, and what a difference that truly makes, when you have to do it and you understand how that translates to getting your equipment in tip-top shape. And it makes a big difference. And as an independent, it was like, "Oh, that could never work," just telling somebody you can't rent it to them just yet because it just came off a truck. Whereas, before, we would send out a 5-gallon bucket with a hydraulical, and it says, "Hey, it's leaking a little bit. Just keep feeding it to it and you'll be all right." And it's just a big difference culturally. Yeah. But ultimately, it's great having those rules in place is better for not only your company but for your customers, because they can now expect not to get a 5-gallon bucket full of hydraulic oil that they have to keep feeding to a machine. They can expect to get a machine that's going to work. So that was a big difference, and I'm sure it's like that with a lot of independents, because you got a minute amount of equipment and you got to make as much money off of it as you possibly can. And your thought process is, if it's sitting here and somebody's wanting it, I'm losing money. Whereas in reality, if you get back to checking the data, the less you check it out, the less you maintain it, the more money it costs you down the road. So.
And then from a culture standpoint within DJs, your employees, that's a big thing, because you would have typically, independents have quite a long tenure for their employees that have been almost part of that family business. How did they take the acquisition?
I think it was a shock right at first, just having that initial meeting with them and saying, hey, by the way, in 2 weeks we're going to be Sunbelt Rentals, or whatever the timeline was. I can't remember how long it was when we announced it. I think what put them at ease is having that interview process with Sunbelt, realizing that Sunbelt themselves actually were backdating their tenure that they had with DJs to translate into Sunbelt. So if they worked with DJs for 10 years, day one starting Sunbelt, it's like they had worked for Sunbelt for 10 years. So they get all the benefits and everything else that comes along with having a long tenure with Sunbelt. And just overall knowing how much more a large company like Sunbelt could offer them, beyond just monetary, but with benefits and training and just the overall options that you have inside the rental industry. As an independent, we have very strict kind of buckets of where we need people. We need somebody in the shop, we need somebody on the counter, we need a driver, and that's kind of where we all just fit. Whereas when you get a big company, there's all the supporting roles. You got the safety people, you have the people who do just the accounts receivable, and you have the analytics people, and you have just all these different options that you can expand to. And I think knowing that, it helped out a lot, because you hate to say that as an independent, that somebody who works for you is in a dead-end job, because they can't really expand any further. They're not going to own the business one day. They're not going to expand into something further. And having that option, I think, really spoke to a bunch of my employees. Spoke to me as part of it. So I think that went a long ways.
And then when we were talking previously beforehand, you told me quite an interesting story around when a customer called you and said that they damaged one of the machines. So it'd be interesting for you just to share that experience. I think that's a great story.
Yeah, so I think it was about 2 weeks after Sunbelt had acquired us. I actually got a phone call from a customer and said that they were driving down the road and saw one of our T870 track skid steers completely submerged in mud and water. Sent me a photo of it, and he said, hey, I don't know who has this on rent from you, but I figured you needed to know. And as soon as I saw the photo, I could feel the pit of my stomach dropping. I was immediately going back through, all right, I bought this machine, I put it on a 48-month note, I owe 3 more years on it. This, the machine costs X amount of dollars. I'm gonna have to write a check for 50 or 60 grand. And I'm just thinking, all right, how am I gonna do this? Because I'm probably not gonna get paid by this independent, about this customer. And then it kind of just clicked. It's, that machine isn't mine anymore. It's Sunbelt's. I work for Sunbelt. They have rules and regulations around this. I'm not having to cut a check for it. And that was probably one of my first nights when I went home and was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Not having that worry, because I know if I was still still an independent going home, carrying that with me, that the fact that I'm going to have to, stroke a check for however much money it was going to be, is sickening. Just, because that's all you can think about at that point, which isn't good for home life or whatever else. You're sitting there trying to eat dinner and talk with your family, and the only thing you're thinking about in the background is, all right, I'm going to have to cut a check. I'm going to have to cut a check. And it just eats you up. And it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders at that point. And it allows me to really stick with the equipment rental industry, which is something that I love. It's been my whole life, without having that just overwhelming stress that comes along with owning a business. And that was I call it my clarifying moment when the switching to Sunbelt was probably one of the best things we ever did.
Awesome. So you've got that story where basically you're getting rid of that fear, or that anxiety when it comes to that note that you had on the machine and paying out that bill. As an independent, then moving into more of under Sunbelt, the stress at home, like thinking about work as much, is that something that reduced as well? Like the fear, like the panic, the constantly thinking about tomorrow or next week or the cash flow or whatever it is as well?
It does. It does. I mean, even with, I came on as a manager, so you still have that thinking of what's going to happen tomorrow, but it's different. It's that excitement now of, hey, I'm getting to go into work, I'm getting to do what I like to do without the fact of wondering if something goes wrong and if I'm going to get a paycheck or whatever the case may be. It's that excitement of, all right, I get to go in tomorrow, I get to engage it, with this person or with, and it's also expanding, something that we didn't do a bunch of before was with salespeople or big job sites because we had our little niche. So it was kind of invigorating to expand my knowledge into something that I had done my entire life. And I'm a big fan of learning. And so now I had all this information at my fingertips. I had this, all these different avenues of business that I, never had delved into at all. And so it was a great experience to just learn more about something that I've been doing my whole life, learn different ways to do things. Like I can't tell you how many times I was having conversations, hey, we thought about getting into this piece of equipment, but we didn't think it'd make any money. But man, it does a really good job. I never thought we could use it for this aspect. And it was a lot of little nuances like that was great. I mean, coming home, you still have your worries, but it's nothing like it was before. My home life was a lot better. My wife was always talking about how, coming home and worrying and being up till 1 o'clock in the morning, was always just something growing through my mind.
Yeah.
And now I kind of had that, come home and like, oh, hey, we got this new piece of equipment in, or hey, I got to learn about this, or, we have an entire climate control division, or, all these specialty things that we didn't have access to before. And it kind of brought the fun back.
And then, so talking about opportunities, so you obviously you transitioned into Sunbelt as the profit center manager for this particular location. Talk me through that progression, because you spoke about like opportunities within Sunbelt as well, and you've moved into a completely different department now. So maybe talk me through the moment that you became that profit center manager and then that career progression.
Yeah, so as part of our deal when we switched over, I was going to stay on as the manager of actually both the locations for a short while, then ultimately just the main one here in Columbia. And it was part of my goal as coming on the Sunbelt was to expand beyond this store. Not that as an independent, I didn't love the store, but I always felt like I knew I was going to be here forever. And that was one of the things when we sold, talking to all the different levels of management, all the different people involved, and hearing the fact that they started off in a store and then moved into a different role. It was something that got me thinking about what I could do. And I always had a knack for, technology stuff and really wanting to learn more, wanting to, just dig into the minute details. I was very methodical about a lot of things. And, we, with Sunbelt, we got, I came into an environment where we worked off of reporting, where before I was having to almost create my own reporting because, I just didn't have the information readily available. I was trying to think of ways to get it. And, you step in the Sunbelt's world and there's reports for everything. And I would literally spend hours at night just digging into stuff and be like, oh man, this is pretty cool how you can figure this out and how you can see this. And so that's what led me into trying to learn a new skill, which was Excel. I'd always been good at doing formulas in Excel, but just really expanding on, after seeing some of the reports that they had with all these crazy slicers and buttons and just a really cool look and instead of just a grid. And so I started learning and got certified at, basic certification in Excel, went back, got my expert certification in Excel. And then I was like, all right, I really love doing these kind of analysis inside of Excel. And so I decided, well, this is what I want to do. And next thing I did is I, brought up to our Sunbelt directory of employees, scrolled down until I found the first person with the title analytics behind their name, and I literally just dialed his phone number right then. Got on the phone with a director of advanced analytics at our support office, and I mean the guy answered the phone. I said, "Hey, my name's Cody Stewart. I'm the Profit Center Manager in Columbia, Tennessee, and I want to get into analytics. What do I need to do?" And I literally talked to that guy for like an hour and a half, just right off the rip. And he said, "You need to talk to this person. You need to talk to this person. You need to learn how to do this." 2 weeks later, I was on a conference call with like all the department heads in the analytics side, and they were just, they loved the fact that I came from the field and knew the business and had an interest in the analytics side. And so they were like, "Hey, we're, expand your skills in this, and this," one of which was Power BI. And we can definitely work on getting you involved in some of our projects so you can see how we operate and how we do things. So I started studying Power BI, got certified 3 months later, and was at that point was already building some of my own reports, and I was involved in some projects, and it just intrigued me. Like, it was mind-blowing to me that you could take so much information, find a value to it, tell a story with it, and then make minute changes, and then see how it affects a multi-billion-dollar company, and then see how that needle moves for something that you came up with an idea of, and then put into place. And it still intrigues me, and so that's kind of what led me into the position I got in now.
And so it's probably a topic we want to talk about a bit. So Sunbelt loves when people want to take on more challenges and diversify their skills, because I think some people think if they make that phone call and ask a director of whatever operations that they're looking at moving into, that the person would push back and say, no, just keep doing your job, whatnot. But Sunbelt wants you to take on more challenges, and they love the fact. So is that something that is like part of the culture, do you think?
It is, and honestly, I didn't realize it because I'd never been in a corporate style structure, and so when I made that call, I didn't have the expectation of the guy even answering the phone. And I kind of figured it was going to be, "Hey, don't bug me with this. You need to go to school and have a bachelor's or a master's degree in this and this and this, and you don't know anything about it. Don't waste my time," type scenario. I'm very busy. And it wasn't the case at all. It was, "Hey, we love the fact you're interested in it. Here are some projects. Here's this, learn this, talk to these people." And it just exploded from there. And every single department head I talked to was very helpful. And it was eye-opening for how, how corporate structure works. You always think of, people that are up there with these fancy roles as sitting behind their big desk, but really they're normal people, and they were actually excited about the fact that I wanted to get into it. So that was great, and still even now I'm reaching out to people all the time that I haven't talked to, and every one of them has been very helpful.
So look, that really is the definition of networking as well, like putting yourself out there to like talk to other people. Is that something that you always sort of understood beforehand, or because after doing that one reach out call and then that opportunity, you've probably realized the power of actually just asking questions and trying to talk to more people? Is that something that you really try and do more proactively?
Especially now, yes, most definitely. I mean, as a rental business owner, we would go to the different shows or whatever else, and it was always good to make connections with other people, because you can gain insights in what's going on in other parts of the country, what equipment does good and what doesn't. So I always had that mentality of that somebody out there knows more than I do, and so you can always learn something from somebody. So I've always been big on, hey, you knock on the door, you call somebody, you figure out, if you have an answer, don't just sit at home and wonder, get out there and make it happen. And it worked out. I made that phone call, talked to that person, and even now I try to get involved in, I'm really getting involved into the analytics side. So getting involved with conversations inside social media networks about, analytics, and having to learn, and being involved in different podcasts, commenting on your post there on LinkedIn kind of led me here. expanding that information or expanding your network for people, it gives you access to knowledge you would never gain from Google. And it's really, really great.
So look, one thing that I think is a really good part of this story is the fact that you didn't study this skill, you learnt it, and you've worked your way through it. So let's dive into the technical aspect a little bit, because this is quite a technical role that you're involved in. So maybe let's just start off with the basics and explain what is Power BI.
Okay. So Power BI is a program from Microsoft that enables you to connect to multiple different data sources, bring that information together, and then organize that information in a way to either answer a question or tell a story by using the data. Instead of having just a standard spreadsheet or having to guess what's going on, you can take this large amounts of data, millions and millions of rows, and put together a trend that you would maybe not ever known existed, and then exploit that in a way to make yourself more profitable or have better customer service or make your equipment last longer. I mean, it literally, that data can control every aspect of your business. And when something that I love to do is, as I was starting to look at all that information and I was able to correlate what happens in the business, because I've been in the business aspect of it my whole life, with, hey, it's interesting that when this changed, this part of the business changed, and understanding the reasons why, and then say, hey, well, it worked for this location. Let's see what happens if we make these changes over here. And then seeing that needle move, it's really makes a big difference. And Power BI gives you the ability to visualize that information. Instead of just looking at numbers on a page, you can see a trend, or you can really pull out the little pieces that make up how to make more money, or how to do a process or a question better, or whatever the case may be. That visualization that really pinpoints and pulls out that information that is what's really needed, that you can't necessarily get by looking at numbers on a spreadsheet.
And let's go down the technical aspect a little bit. So you said multiple data sources, but sometimes the data isn't in the right format that you need it. It might not be in the right table, the right view. So within Power BI, when you connect to a data source, I'm assuming you have like a data warehouse where you create like cubes, let's just call it. Mm-hmm. So is that something that you're involved in as well?
To a point, at Sunbelt we do have like our BI teams that do all the data infrastructure and all that as well. But even with being able to connect to a data source, you've got to do some of that ETL, the transformation and load, extract, transformation, load, and understand how that process works to be able to work for what you're doing for your report. So if I have a particular, say my report's to answer a particular question, and I have to, some of it's going to exist inside this data set, some of it's going to exist in this data set, but then I have to kind of combine both those together and then find a relationship between the two that makes them work. And then not only that, but sometimes I have to format the data to get it into the way that I need it to really just present to whoever the customer may be, whether it's somebody in our business or not. And so having that understanding of what you're looking at, for one, and then two, having the ability within Power Query or whatever the side of inside Power BI that you can kind of just manipulate the data into a way that works for your report to answer the question. Because not everything is just laid out simply of, here's a flat table, let's throw these columns in here, here's a pretty graph. It's usually not that simple. I would say a good 70-80% of your time is actually formatting the data, organizing it in a way, and then actually testing to make sure that the way you have it laid out is correct, and that it actually correlates with what you're trying to say. And whereas the last 10 or 20% is building the visualizations and making it look pretty for whoever you're building it for. So there's a lot of digging and testing that goes around in the background.
Yeah, that's an important point to make, that people that are listening to this podcast don't think that they can just download Power BI and then start making pretty dashboards straight away. There's a lot of legwork that goes into formatting that data and getting it in the right data set. So in terms of, you mentioned customers. So your customer is the internal business.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deliver these dashboards?
So depending on, what group I'm speaking to, if I'm speaking to, executive levels, or if I'm doing something internal for our team, like, mine's a product lines team, it's built differently. If I'm doing something that's going to be for the field, so say it's going to be going out to, all of our stores, and it's going to be consumed by 1,000 different people, it really changes how you need to put the report together. Because I know, people on my team, say there's 6 to 10 people on it, I know what their technical expertise is. I know what they look for and how they would navigate through a report. And plus, it's easy for me to just talk with them one-on-one to be able to get through a report very easily. Whereas if I'm building it for 1,000 different people, I have to encompass the idea of, I just need to be able to hand this to them and understand what the information means. So it needs to be simple. It needs to be laid out in a way that they can navigate, that they can get to their answers in a quick fashion. Because if you hand it to some people, and if they get into it and they don't understand how it works, they're not going to believe in it. And that really affects your adoption rate. So if they're not using the stuff that you're giving them, then it's essentially useless. So it's very important, to me on my side. It's where I use some of my past experience as a web designer, is knowing when somebody looks at a page, what are they going to go to? Where are their eyes going to be drawn to? What do I want them to click on? How do I want to explain this side of a graph versus this side? And I try to bring that in some of the reports that I build, because it's very important that they can easily navigate and get the information they want without having to spend a lot of time. And, you get 1,000 people and it takes them an hour to understand something. That's a lot of man hours. So it's very important to make it just easy, simple, click, here's your information, compared to if it's a tool for my internal team, I can have those extra drill throughs, or I can have those ability for them to dig into the information in different ways and manipulate it themselves. So it's, at that point, it's more of a tool than just a report.
And so basically, there's a user experience element to these reports and these dashboards. But let's take a step back. Like, what's the process to actually build one of these? Do you start with the problem on the decision that someone's trying to make? Because an important factor that I believe is that there's no point creating a dashboard if you're not going to actually use it to make a decision. So what's the actual starting process to actually commence the creation of a dashboard or a report?
So I say 2 different ways. One is obviously where somebody just comes to you and say, hey, I need this. And then the other one is the see a need, fill a need kind of scenario, to where you see a process that somebody's going through, whether you're on a conference call or you're watching them go through something, or you're just paying attention to how your team operates. And then you can say, hey, I can do it better this way. And so I do a little bit of both of those. Obviously I get some of, the people come to me and said, hey, I need to have a view that shows me this so that I can fix this problem. And from my point of view, understanding how the business works helps in my favor compared to other people who are just coming into it. Because when they say, hey, I need to understand how utilization trends worked over blah, 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 blah for this reason, I know exactly what they're talking about without having them explain it. And so, that's at that point I'm building a report to answer a question. And then on the other side, like I said, if I'm watching or paying attention and truly understanding the processes that we go through, that my team and the teams that, around me go through, then I can look at what we do and say, hey, there's a better way to do this, and this is how we do it. And then I build it into Power BI.
With those questions, sometimes the person doesn't know what they want, and they might ask you for a certain type of report, and they get it, and then they realize that they actually wanted something different. Does that happen often?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And that's something that I kind of gained from being a web designer, because you go to talk to a business owner, they just want their information on the internet, and they have an idea in their head what they want, but sometimes it's very difficult for people to portray what they want and then have that other person understand it. It's kind of like that game where they have somebody tell a secret to this person and to this person, and it goes through a room, and by the time it gets to the last person, it's not the same. There's that that lost in translation that happens. So there's definitely a lot of back and forth, a lot of collaboration. You have to truly understand the problem and build it with the aspect of, if I'm the person sitting in that shoe, if I'm the manager, or if I'm the director of this, and I'm trying to answer this question, what do I want it to look like? What's what am I trying to get to? That little nugget of information that's going to be the aha moments for whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody. And so that's kind of what you got to bring to the table, is when you're building it, is truly understanding what the question, the problem is, and then having that collaboration with the person through the process. Hey, this is what I got so far. Does this look like what you need? And a lot of times, these are questions that have been around, so they have other reports that they use to get there that just may not be the greatest. So, hey, give me your Excel sheets that you use to come up with this information you have now, and that way I can kind of use what you're using now, but make it better.
And then, so once you deliver the report to somebody, it's like a living document. Yeah, it continuously might evolve, and you can repurpose those dashboards and other things as well. It's an important factor, is it? It's not just like one-time use, so you can reuse it in other reports as well. Yeah.
Most definitely. So Power BI is very powerful in the fact that you can create a data set and then connect to that same data set multiple times. And it's not just like using the same Excel model or Excel spreadsheet with the same columns. You could have a data model that has 5 different tables that have relationships all built, that has just, some of it could be just very minute details that you built into this model, whereas the report you built on it initially doesn't have those minute details, but this other team over here might need it. So you can take this, the whole idea is that when you spend the time to build a data model and you're putting this information together, is that you want it to fit more than one role. You don't want it to be, all right, I'm just going to build this one report for this one thing and that's it, and you're never going to touch it again. It needs to be something that could evolve into something bigger or better, or this department can use it, but now this other department can build off of it. And so you can build infinite amount of reports off the same data set, and that way it makes it a very powerful tool when you're trying to collaborate across different departments.
And then the cost of doing it as well, like if we go back to maybe building a report, like a static report in like Crystal, so a Crystal report, the cost and effort to build that is quite expensive, and it can take a long time, and once you build it, it's static. So that's probably something that's very needs to be brought up as awareness as well, that these are, yes, there needs to be a thought process into it, but you can deploy stuff quite quickly.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, the modeling part, like I was saying before, is 80% of the work, and modeling the information, testing to make sure it's right, and the last 10 or 20% is the making it pretty, the organize it in the way that it tells the story that they want. So if you think about it in that aspect, if you do the data model that can now build multiple reports, 80% of the job is already completed. And now you're just doing the last 10 or 20% multiple different times, and you're getting all these different great reports off of it. So it goes a long ways when, if you go to answer a question that says, hey, this is what I need, and then 80% of your time is building a data model, and the last 20% is really putting it out there for people. And now if you go to answer a second question, you're gonna have to do that all over again. Whereas in Power BI and the way things are laid out, you can then just connect to it and then spend only 10 or 20% now to build a completely different report with the same information that's just formatted in a different way and tells a completely different story.
Now Sunbelt obviously has a whole team that helps manage these BI and create these BI reports, but independents don't have the resources to do this. So do you think it's more that the software providers in the industry need to provide more assistance in this, or maybe there needs to be companies? Like, how do you think independents could sort of manage that BI side?
Well, Power BI itself, the actual program itself that you can put on your desktop, is free. So that's one great part. That conversation we had earlier, which is having access to the data. When you have 10 machines, it's one thing, but when you don't have the other, it's kind of hard to bring out those nuances. Now, I think it is very important, if you have a program or a computer program, or whatever your software is that you're using, that it collects the data for you. in a way that whether you're able to connect to it through a service that they provide, or have a way that you can connect to it yourself that can really get that information that you need. Because truly, that point of sale and how you write your work orders and how that's where your data points are created. It's those constant transactions, and if you have a software system that can record that information and gives you the ability to connect to it, whether through something that they already have as a service, or being able to download the desktop version of Power BI and then build your own reports off of it, which, Power BI, if you can export it into Excel, you can load that into Power BI and build your reports off of it that way. So it's very important that the rental software that you use actually collects those data points to be able to utilize it the way it needs to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because I think a lot of independents see their technology as a cost rather than an investment. Any of the major players in the market realize that they can't get to a certain size without having the right technology stack behind them. And the way that I've always put it is like these big companies will spend millions, even independents will spend millions of dollars on equipment, but then they don't spend the money on the technology to help them make decisions. It's really something that if you don't make that change, then you're sort of putting yourself in a box. And I think when the next generation of people that are coming through, they're expecting to be able to use that data easily. They're expecting to be able to use their mobile phones very easily. Is that something that you think is like that change is happening now across the industry?
Oh, I most definitely. I mean, if you look at everything we do now, there is data behind it. And if you are not taking advantage of that, you are missing out tremendously. Something that I use as an analogy is like using, hand tools as a carpenter. If you have a beam that is 20 foot long and you put the level at one end and it just looks like it's barely off, and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's fine. Or even if you don't have that at all, if you're a business owner, you're not paying attention to these metrics and you're not even looking at how far off that beam is. What you don't realize is being slightly off at this end doesn't seem that bad, but if you're expanding and you're growing, you add 10 years onto it, or you multiply yourself by 5 times. Now that little bit off on one end is huge on the other end. So it's kind of like building a house without a level. If you don't know how you're tracking and you don't know what you're looking at, you're going to put yourself in a position that you don't want to be in down the road, whether it be by expanding or by just time in general. Because if you're slightly off now, it's not going to get better until you self-adjust. And it's kind of like I said, building a house without a level, it's not a very good thing to do.
Yeah, and even if you want to be acquired and someone wants to know more about your business and the data behind it, if you don't have the data, like, you're going to have to try and dig it up, or you're going to try and prove it. It's even planning maybe in the future to be acquired is a big factor around having the right data behind your business.
Most definitely. And, and in all reality, if you truly understand your business, then you have to have a firm grasp on the numbers, because when you go to do anything, whether you're being acquired, you're going to the bank, you're talking to whatever else, the rental industry is completely different with how we operate with depreciation schedules and everything else that goes into it. And having that information to back you up will get you further in business than you would ever get without it.
No, for sure. I love that analogy. That's a really good one.
Oh, with the levels?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You put a beam out there, and if you're off by a quarter of a bubble on this side, it doesn't seem that big, but 20 feet out, that thing's 10 foot off. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's a good one. So let's learn a little bit more about Cody as well. So obviously working through the family business now within Sunbelt. So is there anyone in particular that you think has played a big influence on your career, maybe from like a mentor perspective?
Yeah, obviously, my father played a huge role in that. He was the one that brought me to work every day, kind of kept me in the rental industry. And even though I'm sure as a teenager, not wanting to work, he really instilled that mentality of, if you want something, you got to go get it. He really grew our business. He worked at it all the time. He was a very, very hardworking person. And I think having that that person, that like role model to show, hey, if you want something, you got to go get it. You got to be willing to work for it, hustle. You don't work 9 to 5 and go home and sit on the couch and watch TV and then complain about everything. If you want something to happen, you got to do it for yourself. And I truly believe that that's what kind of gets me that mentality of, hey, I want to learn more. I want to do more. If I want to become an analytic manager, then I need to, go out and make it happen and not just sit back and wonder why I can't. And so he's definitely that person that made that true.
And then, yeah, talking about like the motivation, like you obviously were mentioning earlier around like the side hustles, like the amount, like you always had that motivation to be doing more. Is that something that you have always had your whole life, or you got it later on?
I think I always worked a lot when I was in high school, because you had to, if you want to have a vehicle, which is very important when you're in high school. But I think I did always have that drive. Because right after that, I got out. I was mowing grass, and then next thing you know, I'm building websites, and I'm always trying to find that next big thing. Or my mind's always working about how to expand, how to do better, and so it's always kind of just been there in the background. And I think having an environment around me that allowed me to expand on that, it was my family, my job, now even Sunbelt, are very supportive of that type of mentality of, hey, you want to do better, this is how you do it, and this is how we get there. I think if I didn't have the people around me or the support, it would probably not be as prevalent in how I am today, because constantly getting beat down, sometimes it makes it more difficult. But always having my parents or my family, or like I said, even Sunbelt now, as I'm growing into what I'm doing, always being there, like, hey, if you want to do something, we're here, we'll give you the tools you need. You can do it all the time. Every time I went to go take a test to get certified in something that was very difficult, family's always there. Hey, you've always excelled in everything you've done. It's no problem. Don't worry about it. Whereas if I had a support system that was like, I don't know why you're doing this, you're not going to get anywhere with it, it probably would have been a lot different.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. So then, if you could give some advice to young Cody, what would you say?
Invest in Google. No.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I think I was always into the weather, and honestly, I didn't get into technology until after I was, well out of high school, was in my 20s. And I think I kind of had that understanding, or that need to know more about technology when I was in high school, but I didn't really push it at that point. I think if I were to go back to a young Cody, high school, and said, hey, you're going to love technology one day. You're going to love computer stuff. You're going to love all this. You study it now, get into it now, instead of, waiting until my mid-20s to realize, hey, this is something I really love to do. Not obviously that it held me back any, but I think realizing that at a younger age would probably help me expand a little bit more.
Yeah, well, 25 is still a pretty young age, yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking more, I'm only 35 now, so, but thinking back to...
You've got a whole lifetime ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly. So, talking to my younger self, because going through high school, which, obviously technology 20 years ago is a lot different than it was now, but I didn't realize how much I would enjoy what I do now until I really until I got exposed to it.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be possible, really. Well, I guess you were doing stuff with technology beforehand, but then Sunbelt really helped you expand that in the data side.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Because I didn't even know what data analytics was until Sunbelt bought us. I always had that really analytical kind of way of thinking, and then when all that information became available to me, it's just like I went into overdrive. Like I had to know everything, I had to see everything, and that's what really got me into doing what I do now. And it's funny because I enjoy it so much and I love everything about it, and I talk about it all the time, but then, my family and friends don't really understand what it is.
Yeah.
And so I'll get to talking about something and this glazed look
Yeah.
comes over their face, and the next thing I know, I'm talking for 2 hours about, how to put together this data set, or how, data analytics and AI is going to change the world. And then they obviously don't care. But
The same thing happens with my podcast. I'm always talking to my family about it, and they're like just like nodding mostly.
yeah, and it's really, I think it's a testament to how much I really love it compared to, not that I didn't love what I did before, but it's just like the that fuel and passion behind it. It's, I'm constantly trying to learn more, and it's just it's almost addictive to just know that there's so much more information out there, and the more I learn, it's the more I truly understood that I didn't know anything before. And so it's really intriguing.
Yeah, it's like that almost like the snake and ladders. Yeah, like you
Yeah.
you open up a door and you think that you know so much, and then you get there and then you realize you actually know nothing, and then you think that you know everything again, and then you go to the next level and then you realize, oh my god, what the hell?
Yeah,
I still know nothing.
I actually come to that here just recently. I've been inside of our inside of our company. I've been reaching out to people who do what I do, and because I expanding on that network and trying to build that collaboration. And you're like, I think I've got a pretty good grasp on on this analytic thing, or on DAX, or whatever else it could be. And then you talk to somebody, or you see somebody else's work, and you're like, man, I didn't even know you could do this. This is
Yeah.
amazing. And then you talk to that person, and it just makes you feel about this small again. And you're like, all right, I got something I need to work on. And that's what kind of fuels that desire to do better.
Yeah, from the technology side, it's quite amazing that like you can write this really long algorithm or code base in there, and then you think you've done a good job, and then you talk to someone else and they've just got like a one-liner.
It does the same thing.
Does the same thing, and it's like 10 times faster. So
Oh, yeah.
it's stuff like that. Then you realize that there's levels to this, and you don't get anything. You don't get somewhere and just stay stagnant. Like you need to realize that you need to be always evolving and improving and learning, and there's always someone, like, what do they say, like, you should always employ people smarter than you, because you want to learn from, like, you want the best in the business, and you want to be learning in your personal development. Same thing, like, there's always someone better out there than you, and networking allows that opportunity to grow.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, everybody I talk to, I learn something from them. And like, honestly, when I first started getting into this, I was probably bugging a lot of people because I was wanting to learn more about Power BI. So every report I came across, I looked up who the owner was. I was like, hey, send me the original files. And I'm sitting there trying to re-engineer, reverse engineer everything that they did. And then as I did it, I would be like, all right, I need to know how they did this, this, and this. And then I'm calling them up. Hey, how did you do this? Or why'd you do it this way? And, and really when I first started, I was seeing some of the stuff that people were doing, and I'm like, oh, that's not the right way to do that. I don't know why they did it that way. But then when I talked to them and hearing everything behind it, I'm like, that's pretty ingenious. I'm glad instead of just saying, oh, they didn't know what they were doing, I called and talked to them. And that essentially is how I expanded into everything I've done. Is I called every person I could think of and just asked them, hey, how'd you do this? Or why'd you do it this way? And something as simple as, why'd you put a 0 in front of this formula? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And then they're like, oh, well, because if it comes up blank, then you're going to have 0 there. Okay. That seems so simple that I was like, that just doesn't make sense why you would want to do that.
Yeah.
But it's just little different things like that.
Yeah. The one that always used to get me, because I've done quite a bit in Power BI as well, was when the I would upload data in there, and I would be trying to use the date for something, but then Power BI would think it's like a number, and then the formula wouldn't work. And I was like, what? Why is this not working? And just like a simple thing of like storing it as a date correctly at the start solves that entire problem, but it can like lead you down this rabbit hole if you don't actually get that preparation right.
Oh yeah. And then even using time intelligence DAX functions, if you first you got to get that date into a date format, and then you have to have, if you're going to mark it as your date table for your entire model, it can't have any gaps in the dates, and it has to be perfect. And you don't realize, a lot of times I'll come across a report that doesn't have a designated date table, or have a column as a date table, and they're trying to figure out a way to do some kind of formula around year over year or month over month or any kind of relative date function.
Yeah.
And hey, if you have this date table and you mark this little box, it makes it tremendously easier when you're doing any kind of relative date functions.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So then going across all that, like you've had almost like multiple lives in the rental industry. So how do you define success now?
I guess it'd be never giving up and never stopping. If at one point, whether it had been from the time that my grandfather started it to my father took over to when I took over, if they just at any point said, all right, I'm good with where we're at, we're just going to sit here and coast, and we would have failed. It would have stopped then. Eventually it would have went stagnant. It would have went down. So the fact that my grandfather never stopped, my father never stopped thinking about, hey, how can we expand? How can we do better? What is something different that I can do, in our industry to make it better? Because we all rent the same stuff. This genie lift here is the same genie lift that's down the street. But what is it that I'm doing different that's going to make them come to me instead of them? And so sitting down and just thinking about that and never stopping the innovation around the rental industry, or I guess any industry that you're in, is truly what helps you be successful. Because even if you're going to have your ups and downs, there's times where we went backwards, or there's times where things happened. 2008 was a terrible year, but because of that and how we changed, we had some of the best years afterwards.
Yeah.
We didn't just sit back and be like, oh well, 2008 was a terrible year. What can we do? We thought differently, and we came back stronger. So I would say that would be kind of what defines your success. If you don't have that drive, then even if you're successful right now, I don't think it'll last. You got to have that ability to keep going.
Very nice. All right, Cody. Well, thank you for coming on the Rental Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.